Welcome to our Phase 4 Letters and Sounds video. Phase 4 is a relatively short phase in our Letters and Sounds programme. We have Phase 2, which is approximately 6 weeks, Phase 3, which takes about 12 weeks, and then there is only 3 weeks given for teaching of Phase 4, although it will be revised to embed children's learning. This is because Phase 4 has no new sounds, despite what internet resources may say. There are lots of websites which claim to have Phase 4 sounds. Please don't use those. Phase 4 is just about consolidating the learning from Phase 3, but putting it into longer words. I'll explain a little bit further in a minute. So the children in each lesson will revise their very familiar catchphrase cards from Phase 3. If you haven't seen the Phase 3 video, each digraph or trigraph, a digraph being 2 letters that make one sound and a trigraph being 3 letters that make one sound, each have their own memorable catchphrase at Overchurch. So I, we say high flight. O would be goat in a coat. It's really important that the children still keep these at the forefront of their minds because a lot of the words they are spelling will require these at Phase 4. So Phase 4 teaches the children adjacent consonants, and that is about putting consonants at the start of a word or the end of a word that aren't a digraph because they don't make one sound. They are 2 consonants next to each other, but they make 2 different sounds. For example, in stamp, we don't teach stamp as st. We used to. They used to be called consonant clusters or beginning blends, and that's where some of the internet resources are confusing. But now our strategy is to blend to read all the way through a word, which takes away any clustering of consonants. Hence the term adjacent consonants. It just means they're next to each other, but they make different sounds. For example, st, a, p, stamp. There are adjacent consonants here, but we blend them separately, and there are adjacent consonants here, but we blend them separately. Let's have a look again with another word. Block. We would have at one point taught block as with bl. We don't do that anymore. We blend all the way through the word. B, l, o, k. Block. M, e, n, d. Mend. Ot, spot. Sk, ap, scrap. So lots of them are just repeated consonants with one vowel, but we get to some later in Phase 4 that would have the vowel digraphs in as well. And I am just trying to find one to show you here. So this word, again, as we do in Phase 3, we would try and spot the digraph first. Ooh, there's our digraph, E. Just to avoid the children getting into an situation here, we find that as E. S, t, e, t, s. Streets. Really quite tricky for children to put that many consonants together. So this phase does require a lot of practice with blending. The teachers again will send things home to help your child when they reach Phase 4. They are also expected to start to read multi-syllable words at the other phases as well, but they are trickier when you get to Phase 4. I shouldn't say trickier because that confuses us with tricky words. They are more challenging when it gets to Phase 4. And that's where we can chunk the words. So for example, to read this very long word, we might chunk it into 2 syllables. Drift and wood. The children count syllables by putting their hand underneath their chin. Drift, wood. It goes down twice, which tells us that it is a 2-syllable word. And then they can chunk to read it. So they would just read the drift first and then the wood, and then put it together. If, t, drift. Ooh, there's the digraph O, because I know that this grapheme can say oo, o, w, wood. Put it together, driftwood. Again, something that's going to take a lot of practice, and we will provide the words for you to help your child. At phase 4, as I've just mentioned, they still have tricky words. Tricky words are words that cannot be decoded easily because they don't follow the patterns that the children are usually used to. What's interesting about tricky words, though, as we work through the phases, is they're only tricky for a limited period of time. So at phase 4, this is a tricky word because the children haven't yet learned that this grapheme says W. They only know the single letter W. So it's tricky at phase 4. Once they've learned this at phase 5, this word is no longer tricky. So the teachers are very mindful of that as they move through the programme. But for this word, you would just look at the tricky part. Oh, that looks like it says wuhen. Actually, it doesn't say wuhen because this, the tricky part of the word, actually says w. But you haven't learnt that yet, so we're teaching you it as tricky. We have our robot Rex, who is still here to help us with our sound talking. Sound talking is even more vital at phase 4 because of the amount of sounds the children have to hear in a word. Think of a word like scraps. The auditory discrimination of a lot of different consonants there. They have to hear the s, k, r, a, s. So it's tricky, and at phase 4, when they're spelling, children often miss ones out, and it may be something that you have to help them learn to self-correct. We follow the same strategy as we do at phase 3, where children would be making the words, using word building cards, making them using magnetic letters if they're struggling with their letter formation, and then we would be modelling writing the words, hiding it, getting children to count the phonemes in the word. For example, stamp, s, t, a, so they know they have to write 5 graphemes. Phase 4 is a challenging one, so please speak to your teacher if you're not sure and you would like further resources to help you. Thank you for listening.